right. Welcome to our fifth alumni chat of fall 2022. I can't believe it is October, but we are here. I want to thank Vanessa Phillips for being here today. Vanessa is a 2019 marketing graduate. Currently, she is the media activation manager at Essence and is working on the Google account, and that is very new. Previously, she was a senior strategist for business solutions at Horizon Media. So, Vanessa, I think because maybe some of the students that are watching the record or here live might have been coming in because of your role at Horizon. I'm going to, with the questions I ask, if you wanted to play a little bit in both spaces, that'd be great. So first question, can you take a few minutes to describe what you do and share the work of your organization? And then you can also describe the kind of roles that you have had in the past. So that might be the place where you talk a little bit about.
Yeah, of course. I do also want to mention quickly that the role that I held for a little bit over a year, because my tenure at Horizon was also a little short, but the previous role that I held for quite some time was at OMD, which is an Omnicom company, and it was on the Nissan account. So I mostly work in digital investment and activation, and that's what this current role now is at Essence. And I'm on the Google account, but obviously Google is a gigantic company with many products. So the team here at Essence is actually split into what is internally referred to as pods. And these pods will cover off on different Google products. So right now, my current team is mostly focused on Fitbit and Nest. And the term like digital investment and activation, that essentially refers to the fact that my team is working on digital channels. So within advertising, there are several different channels that an activation team could focus on, but my team is focused on digital spaces. And what that typically means is paid social media. That means search engine management. That also means programmatic buying and direct buying for digital properties. So like any websites you would see, and also streaming platforms. And we get briefed in by our clients and then strategy and planning teams with a specific budget and goal in mind. And then the responsibility of our team is to basically translate that into real world implications. So where should we spend this money? How much money should be going to each partner? How do we want our ads to show up to the end consumer? And what types of ads would be most effective for a given goal?
So that's a lot of different things. Like when you were starting, I was thinking like, when students are like looking, and I'm thinking marketing students, but also, so I'm going back to a little bit of basics, knowing that the folks on the call might be at the very beginning. And some folks might be grad students. So we might have a mix here. But so when you graduated, you started at, so basically you've been in an agency for a long time, so is that?
Yes. So I would say when you graduate and you want to go into marketing, you have two choices. You can either go what would be referred to in my world as client side, which is essentially, so in my current example, I would be working at Google if I were client side, or you go agency side. So that's the choice I made initially after graduation. And I do think it's typical for a lot of people who go into marketing to get experience agency side first and then move client side or brand side later on.
Okay, that's great. So like we're going back to basics here. So that's a question I get a lot, is that should I start agency? Should I start, and people say industry or clients, should I start client side? Just from your perspective, again, you're one person, you're not a recruiter, you don't know all, not magic. But I mean, if a student were to say like, I'm interested in both, what would you might advise for somebody that is said, should I start an agency? What's the benefits of that?
Yeah, I feel like if you're interested in both, agency is really the way to get your hands on so many different like opportunities. I feel like if you do go client side or brand side initially, you're automatically in a bit of a narrowed scope. Like, especially if you are not sure which type of industry that you would be interested in doing advertising or marketing for. Being agency side also gives you the opportunity typically to switch clients. Like if, let's say, like, oh, I joined on the Airbnb account, but I'm really interested in Google, like a year, 6 months in, you can talk to your manager about that. And that's something that, like, in my experience so far, all the managers that I've had are very open to, like, especially when I was a bit like more entry level, they're very open to, like, discuss with you what you like, what you don't like, and what it would look like if you want to transition clients or even maybe look at transitioning roles. And I do think, like, there are just a lot more choices. But if you're like, oh, I'm obsessed with, like, makeup, and you see some, like, great opportunity brand side at L'Oreal or something like that, that's a different story, of course. But I feel like more people have a lot of questions, or they're not certain, or you might get somewhere and then be like, this is not what I thought it is, which has definitely been the experience for me. So I would recommend agency side first.
And I've also heard, so I'm trying to dispel myths or, get clarity too, is that sometimes it's harder to start client side. Branding can be a bit more advanced in your training. It's not that it's impossible, but any thoughts in that direction?
Yeah. I mean, I think, to be completely transparent, I was also, I'm saying everything now with the, like, 2020 vision looking back. But I was definitely interested in both when I was graduating. And in my experience, yes, I do think it's a bit more difficult. Certain large companies, especially, will have maybe rotation programs that you could join. And I will say, like, those are obviously going to be very competitive, very desirable for entry level, because you will get experience on different teams at those companies. And so I do think it would be more difficult unless you're able to network really well, and have some connection. Or, of course, if you interned somewhere, I feel like that's always helpful. But in my experience, yes.
So, as I'm kind of thinking back over the ones they were saying, so you were at OMD, which was an Omnicom company, Horizon Media, and currently at Essence. I mean, it's a lot to kind of think through, but, like, can you talk about, one of the questions that we talked about is, can you describe the culture of your organization, kind of thing? So is there, what would you say the culture of those particular organizations were like? Big, small, tight knit, like, or what is anything that would be helpful for students that are kind of thinking agency, and those particular agencies might seem interesting?
Yeah. So, and I also, for context, the OMD Nissan job was not my first role. So I also worked at a pretty small independent agency in Baltimore called R2I, R2 Integrated. And R2I is, like, yes, quite small. And then Horizon, I would say, is maybe medium sized in my view, but they are one of the largest, if not the largest, independent agency. And one thing that students will learn, if they don't already know, and this is something, shout out Professor Scuba, he told me about this when I was still a student. There is something called the agency family tree. So all these larger agencies with, like, the really attractive brand name clients are typically owned by holding companies. And so, as I mentioned, OMD is an Omnicom company. And then Essence, where I'm at now, is a WPP company. And so I would highly recommend Googling like agency family tree 2022, and it'll like essentially break down which holding companies own these and what types of agencies they have. But to get back to the question, I would say generally speaking, agencies move so quickly. And in my experience, honestly, what really separates them from each other are the people you're working with. And I do think this is advice, generally speaking, no matter what you go into, that like make sure the people that you interview with, you feel like you could work with them as well. Because I do feel like it's not even on a per company basis so much as it is per manager and per team or even client. Um, and so for me, joining OMD and Nissan, or even now joining Google and Essence and at Horizon as well, there's a very flat structure. Like, of course, there's hierarchy, and there are people that you will go to when you need to ask questions and people that you will go to for certain approvals. But in terms of like taking responsibility and stepping up when, you know, certain things hit the fan, it's more of a question of who has kept up with what's going on, and also like who is available at that time. And like I do think there's a lot of room in the agency world that if you're ambitious and if you're paying attention, that you can take on leadership fairly quickly. So for me, when I joined Nissan, I ended up getting promoted after 8 months, which is, you know, faster than the typical cycle. And it was due to the fact that like I was speaking up in meetings, I was like representing my team, not only internally but also with partners and things like that. And so I do think the agency world is a good place for mobility. I feel like hopefully within your team, if you like your team, or if you choose to switch. And like I said, that fast pace is both a benefit and it can be, I guess, a negative depending on your own preference. I know for me, I cannot stand to have a slow day. I enjoy kind of the chaos and the change that happens. And so I found that it really suited me, but that's definitely something to be aware of. And I will say that agencies definitely want to be competitive. So I do think that there are like good benefits in terms of like PTO or like just a calendar of holidays off. Like a ton of agencies, in fact, like everyone that I've worked for gives like that whole Christmas break sort of deal and into the new year. And so I do think there can be good benefits. And in terms of work-life balance, you would just have to feel out the team during the interview process because it is very much so based on the account.
No, that's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I was even thinking like when you were going through, and I remember that the R2 integrated or your very first one kind of coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a smaller company, but you really grew. So it's like if student were to ask,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what if I start small? Will I actually get there?
Mm-hmm.
I guess your question is, well, look at me and I did, you know, so so if they're looking around, and by the way, I did drop in add the current or the 2021 version of the global family tree, which is as if you open it, everybody, if you're opening it now, you'll see it's very big.
Very big.
You'll need it's very, very big. So what would you recommend if a student, as they're looking around, and this will lead us to eventually timelines, but if what they're seeing is like a job offer at a smaller place, go for it or hold on, or there's a lot of mobility in the industry?
I think it also really depends on the market when you graduate. So for me, actually, I had an experience where probably about February or March of senior year, I was in the interview process with IPG Media Brands, and suddenly they lost. I'm trying to remember what account that was, but they lost a very large client. And the way that the agency world works is typically when an agency loses a particular client, they might have layoffs. Although I will say right now, the agency world has been going through a talent shortage, really. So, like my senior year, I would say the market was actually a bit bad because when I was in that interview process and they lost that huge account that was employing, I think it was over 200 people, they had a round of layoffs and they had a hiring freeze. And so I actually was in that interview process and ended up being unable to continue because of the hiring freeze. And that's how I ended up at R2I eventually. So I'd say you have to really keep your eye on the market right now. And obviously, it's a bit different for me now that I have like a couple years under my belt. But just depending on like if you're getting interviews or not, or like if you're seeing the listings for entry level or not, or even if you like do an informational interview with an alum working at an agency, you can kind of get the information about like how their company might be looking. And one thing that I did want to make sure to say that I think is relevant to say now is that agencies rarely hire in advance like that, like the interview process that I was going through. And I think I was only able to be in that process because it was an MBA alum from McDonough who was leading that team and like specifically looking for Georgetown graduates to join his team. Typically, we look for people to start probably about 2 weeks. Like if you go through the interview process, we like you, we think like it's a go, we are trying to move quickly and get someone in who can like immediately start to be onboarded and start supporting us. So, and that's something that I don't think that I truly understood when I was a senior. And it definitely, I saw my friends in other industries having things lined up, but I'm here to say like, don't sweat it. That's a hard pill to swallow. But I had my job at R2I and started at the end of June after graduation, even though I didn't have it secured at graduation. So like the marketing, or at least the advertising employment cycle is just very ad hoc. So don't panic about having something lined up extremely far in advance.
Thank you. I guess it's like that's
Mm-hmm.
perfect. It led me to timeline because that's
Yeah.
jobs come when they're needed. And
Mm-hmm.
so for an example, for those people, not everybody was there, but we had Paramount in last week. And so what they were saying to seniors is that please don't apply anywhere, like 4 to 6 weeks in advance, like that's it, because we need you when we need you. And then the start date might be something that's in after you graduate. So like that kind of mixes or meshes with your timeline. Basically, it's like you applied and you started kind of in the June timeframe. And my guess, I'll ask about internships because I'm sure some people who are watching this too, that are maybe they're undergraduates and so they're not even at the I'm going to apply stage. What would you say about internships? Also, when would you start looking?
Mm-hmm. Definitely springtime, I would say. And also, honestly, don't be afraid to cold email companies. I know that that's really intimidating, but actually, one of my internships, I interned with Kung Fu Tea Corporate in New York, which is a bubble tea company, in case anyone doesn't know. And I cold emailed them, like, did not have a contact there, and ended up, I literally bussed in the middle of finals week to New York, interviewed with them, bussed back to Georgetown, like finish my finals. But it was worth it because I got the internship. But yeah, definitely in springtime, begin looking. I also think like no one is too young to start doing informational interviews and building your network. I think that's something that I wish I had probably realized, is that it's not only important, I think, to develop great relationships with your professors and like the people at Georgetown. That's one thing. And you definitely need to do that as well. But the alumni network is there all the time. And like it has been so, so critical to me in like my professional development that like there's nothing I could recommend more than starting to talk to people now, because even if they don't have an opportunity that they could tell you about immediately, later on if something comes up and they're like, oh, this is what Vanessa mentioned to me, like she'd be interested in, maybe I should just like ping her, like it was really great talking with her, I like have her top of mind. um so I think springtime, probably March. And then if you're not seeing things listed somewhere, definitely cold email or try to find an alum that you could speak to and kind of feel it out, because they might know something that's not explicitly posted anywhere.
Yeah, thanks for kind of going into like the networking. I call it for students like relationship building, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not just entirely it's not a transactional thing. It's like you're building a relationship with the person and
Mm-hmm.
you're learning more. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
doing it right, then it is a relationship. The other thing is I'm thinking about networking. The other questions that I often get are
Mm-hmm.
skills. Now, you are a marketing major, so you are getting a lot of
Mm-hmm.
those classic marketing classes. I'll have
Mm-hmm.
psychology majors or people not who are not marketing
Mm-hmm.
majors, and they're saying, so what hard skills should I develop?
Mm-hmm.
I will say that having spoken to some marketing alumni, they'll say Excel. Please learn Excel. Excel's great, and then we can teach everything else. But I mean, I'm curious what
Mm-hmm.
you think, like what other skills,
Mm-hmm.
because we do have access to things like LinkedIn Learning.
Mm-hmm.
You can take marketing classes. So just anything that you
Yeah.
suggest in terms of skill building.
Yeah. I think this is gonna be maybe a little bit funny, but I'm gonna go ahead and agree with the Excel part. That's definitely true. But I will say, like, that's also a matter of like if you're paying attention, to be honest. I feel like the business school core is there. And like if you're paying attention in OPM and things like that, like you should be ready for at least the basics of anything that would happen in an entry level media role. But like familiarizing yourself with it, that's never gonna hurt you. Even beyond what you learn in class, I'd say like pivot tables. I can't like the number of times that that comes up. And I feel like ultimately, once you start to do it, it's very easy. It's just a matter of like that initial knowledge. Um, but yeah, pivot tables, VLOOKUP, that sort of thing. But honestly, what I find to be the most critical in an agency environment is the soft skills. I know it would be easier if I could just give you a list, but sadly there are a lot of media platforms that I feel like frankly students will just not have access to until they're in an internship or until they're in a role. Um, but I would say like if you're interested in paid social media, there are Facebook blueprint exams. They do cost money to take. If you're in an entry level role, typically your company will pay for you to take those. So it's definitely up to you if you want to make that choice of like seeking out those certifications. They are there, but they would also be funded if you were in a role. Um, and like Twitter has flight school, Snapchat, like they all have their own education platforms where you could take these exams and get certifications. Google is the same way. If you're interested in paid search, they also have certification exams. Trying to think, direct, which is like more like a buy that you negotiate with a partner, that's not via a platform. That is definitely more reliant on soft skills and it's just a process knowledge situation. But I really think the most important thing that McDonough taught me were the soft skills of like working with other people and being proactive. Like, I can't tell you how many times I feel like little things that I took for granted at Georgetown really gave me an advantage in my professional life. I started to do coffee chats on my Nissan team just so I could better understand not only my team, but the other teams we were collaborating with on a daily basis. And my executive director, which was my boss's boss's boss, loved it so much that he took this and presented it to senior leadership, like the concept of these coffee chats in order to collaborate better and like understand the function of all the teams and how we can work together in a more efficient way. And he like loved that. And that was something that I was like, oh, this is an everyday thing at Georgetown that we're told to do. But it really like even gave me the ability to stand out on that team. So I personally think, similarly to what everyone has said, really everything that you're going to need to know day to day platform wise can be taught on the job and you can get paid. But the soft skills are things that like you can't, like it's a lot harder once you're already in the professional environment to be like, I need you to like engage in meetings, like da da da. So I think that's most important.
Oh no, that's great, because that's the other piece too. It's like, I think students really do kind of focus on like, what skills can I do, especially for students that might be psychology majors or American studies majors, because they feel like they don't have it. And so, but like it's so great to hear. It's like your soft skills really carry you far.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I will say like I majored in marketing because that's what I enjoyed. That's why I really liked the coursework and like I knew that I wanted to do that professionally. That being said, if there's like some topic that you love, that you're passionate about, you should pursue it. Like you won't have any other time besides college to do that, right? And maybe you're thinking like, oh, I don't have that direct link if I'm a psychology or if I'm a history major, whatever. But now that I've gotten to a point where I'm also a part of interviewing people for entry level roles, we are not necessarily looking for like some type of specific platform knowledge or skills or anything like that. We're looking at like, do we think that we can work well with them? Do we think they fit the team? Do we think they will keep up with the pace? That sort of like thing, or like, are they detail oriented? Are they passionate? We're not really looking for like, oh, I have like every possible Facebook certification known to man. Yeah.
That's great. I think that's probably it's a huge relief, and not only to marketing majors who are doing the courses, but don't of course have everything, but the people who are, not doing them. So, as I'm kind of like thinking, I mean, there's a lot of questions, but I'm thinking of the ones that I get all the time, but then I think I'm thinking about interviewing. So a lot of times what I'll get is questions like, are there certain interview questions I should really be prepared for? And it sounds to me the ones around soft skills people should be prepared for, conflict management, maybe writing, detail oriented, things like that, because that's what's telling. But is there anything else that you can think of if you're going for an entry level role, or even for our grad students who are watching something that's a little bit above that, that they should be mindful of?
I think honestly, like in my entry level interviews, the Excel question was always there. It's always there. But honestly, I didn't really get many like hardball questions. I think one thing, just a note on those soft skill questions, is that like it will benefit you a lot to have compelling examples. So I don't want to just be told, oh, I'm detail oriented. I want to be given an example of like how you have demonstrated this. And of course, like it doesn't even have to be in another marketing role. It could be in like one of your clubs, or like, a different type of internship or something like that. But if you have a compelling narrative surrounding these skills, it's going to go a lot further than just some like explicit statement. Other than that, if people are a little bit above entry level, it will really depend on the function that they're going for. And there are so many at agencies, but for mine in particular, it starts to go into like media buying platforms, which I think for the industry standard, I will just mention Prisma. it's probably not relevant, but Prisma skills are like highly sought after. And that's just a platform that's used to input. I'm trying to think of a way to say this, but in campaigns, we have everything broken out by partners that we're running with. And then Prisma is this platform that allows us to track all of that and also the budgets for it. And so it's a very critical platform. And even agencies that don't use it use something very similar to it. So it's a good thing to know about.
Oh, that's great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Mm-hmm.
one I know about and wouldn't have been one that I would have brought up. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for
Yeah.
introducing that one.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of some other basic things. A lot of times I'll get asked about typical entry-level job titles. Like when I'm starting to look,
Mm-hmm.
what are is it account
Mm-hmm.
assistant, marketing coordinator? Like what are things that if you were looking at not skills, but titles
Mm-hmm.
that you would say, look for these or do keyword
Yeah.
search?
Yeah. I would say that I think becomes more of an issue. Like if you go up a couple levels, it's so funny. The naming conventions are different at all the agencies, and like the amount of levels between, being in a more entry level situation and then being in a situation where you'll start to manage people. It's very difficult to figure that out across the board. But for like first roles out of college, I would say the keyword associate. That's typically like the very first role somebody would have. So, for example, even though I had had my R2I job, at R2I, I had been on a strategy team. So I had none of the technical skills that you need to do media activation, even though I had agency experience. And so I came in as an associate of digital investment and activation, which is a mouthful. Um, but I came in at like that title. And I know that like for other teams, it might be something like planning associate or something like depending on the team you want to go into, or be like um, analytics associate, measurement associate, something with the word associate in it. Not senior associate, that will be higher, but just the like word associate and the function is typically going to be the first role out of college, or like with a little bit of experience. Mm-hmm.
No, that's really helpful. That's usually
Mm-hmm.
kind of like basic questions, and I think for if there's grad students on here, I know it'll be more challenging for you. So that would be like reach
Mm-hmm.
out to Vanessa and have a good informational interview. It's a possibility. All right, so I want to end up the recorded version so we can get to
Mm-hmm.
the students who are live and so they can ask their questions. So
Mm-hmm.
I have two things, but if there's anything I'm missing, Vanessa, that you think that you want to leave the folks who are recorded, let me know. But two
Mm-hmm.
things I think, like, are there any publications you follow or things that you're like, oh, you should sign up to get this, like Ad Age or whatever it is that you follow and you think this would be really cool for students, and
Mm-hmm.
emerging trends. So not exactly the same. Well, yes, because emerging trends you find when you sign up for this stuff, but anything you can think of in that area.
Mm-hmm. So I think most marketing kids at least would have heard of Ad Week or Brand Week, or like they have several publications under that umbrella. But that is behind a paywall typically. So you can be aware of that, or even follow them on LinkedIn, and like they'll say something like, then you could Google, try to get around the paywall because it is expensive. But there is a publication called The Drum. And that one, I don't think, like, as long as you have your ad blocker off, it's typically not as gated as the Ad Week stuff. So I would say take a look at that. I mean, especially like if you know that you're going to be interviewing for stuff, people are not necessarily going to ask you about that, but it doesn't hurt to have looked at it. Or if you just have like some free time, you want to feel productive, I would recommend it. Um, for me, I personally don't follow branding or like strategy stuff too closely. I find it to be rather full of industry jargon, and not so useful, to be frank. I don't, there are different facets of marketing for different people. I really like my technical skills and like investment and thinking about the technical aspects of these campaigns. And for that, I would say one really cool thing that I have seen happening is the gamification of ads, which is like typically can be called like rich media. And essentially what that is, it's not display and it's not video, they're interactive components. And sometimes it's like being turned into a game. And that can often be seen with these types of ads called value exchange ads. And it's where a consumer has to interact with the ad and then they're given like a benefit or something like that. But they have to complete the action to receive the benefit. I think those are really interesting and something that's like, there's a lot of progress being made with them and like having them be seamless for the end user. And then another thing is integrations of ads into game environments, which is like another separate thing that I think is really cool that I've been seeing, which is where their advertising companies are what we would call publishers on my team, and they take your ads and they can insert them into mobile games often. But I know like there are certain like large game companies that are also trying to do this. I feel like maybe Roblox or something is trying to figure out a way to monetize and like put ads inside the game. And then lastly, I think a lot of what is widely known as like traditional cable TV players, so like huge networks, like if you want to think about NBC or NBCU, in the advertising industry, that those are referred to as linear TV players, and there are linear TV activation teams. But those players have started now to try to mesh linear TV and digital streaming deals together, kind of forcing my team and the linear TV team to collaborate very closely on campaigns. And streaming is always undergoing a lot of change. So if you're interested in very specifically like digital campaigns, I would say like all of those things are like, if someone happened to ask you in an interview, like, why are you interested in this? Or like, what have you been, like, what have you been reading about this? Those will all be good things to bring up. And they might be like, how did you know? But yeah, those are also things like you could probably find something about those on the drum, for example, if you know what to look for.
That's good. And so maybe it's like, it's good also to know, like, you don't have to be expert, but if you have like the words and you're doing a little research, you at least have something to work with if people are asking.
Yeah.
So, so that's kind of like, as I'm trying to think through and, wrap up the recorded to go to the in-person, is there anything, Vanessa, that I missed that you feel like it's important to kind of say to the students that are watching this later?
Yeah, I'll just say two things. I think, and I'm just going to harp on this as much as possible, take advantage of the people in the alum network. Like, honest to God, if you don't do it, you're wasting so much time. You're wasting so much time. Like, your resumes are going into those like systems, right, where they're just scanned by AI. But if you know someone, especially someone who you connected with and can like advocate for you even a little bit, your resume is being sent to a real person, to the recruiter oftentimes. Like, I just can't emphasize this enough. And like, oftentimes if you call people and you ask them questions and let them talk about themselves, like, who doesn't love that? And like, you're also saving yourself so much time, even though it can be intimidating. And then second of all, I'll also say, it stands out so much if you talk to someone and then you send them a thank you note. I can't tell you like how many people I've interviewed, not only for like in my professional life, but also I'm like an alum interviewer for Georgetown. And I think like this is a piece of advice I was given very early on, and maybe people haven't always heard this, but like if you talk to someone and they've given you their time, like it's not very difficult to just tell them thank you over email. Even if you said thank you at the end of the call, like the fact that you're cognizant enough of their time that you would like follow up saying that, or like even if you want to continue the connection, that's a great way to set the stage for that. And it really, low cost, high benefit. So it's, I would recommend it.
And I second it.
Mm-hmm.
Usually one of the big things that I talk about in meetings. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so Vanessa, thank you so much. And so folks that are watching this in the record, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of it. And Vanessa and everyone who's live, if you could hold for a second while I end the recording, we can go to live questions.